Hello, this is Richard Anderson, and this is the finals video for negotiations and strategy. This particular video is my second one, and I have a guest, a cat from Thailand. No, just kidding. So what I'll be discussing is two separate scenarios. One of them is a win-win situation, and another one is general negotiation strategy and techniques used for Southeast Asia when you buy things. So I've actually included a number of different samples of how you use to negotiate when you are overseas, and the first subject will include this right here, just a simple card in a transaction. So now, time for some slides. Here we go. Hello and welcome back. Mass, if only negotiations was like this with no context, but unfortunately face-to-face always has context. So the first example I'm going to discuss is what I like to call a win-win situation. And what it involves is a person that I've known for quite a long time, a friend who I've gotten along with and have a good understanding with. So it's just one of the negotiations I'm going to talk about, but is a completely valid negotiation because of how the transaction happened. So one of the things I like to do is, since I've been back to the United States, is when I see my friends is to have coffee, chat, relax, catch up on good times. So my one friend that I had the transaction with, I had him come over and we were discussing how much we love games. Both of us just enjoy video games, board games, any kind of thought and logic game. So it had been brought up, and one of his favorite games just happens to be Magic the Gathering. That hey, I've been sitting on these cards for like ever and a day, and I was like, yeah, why don't you look through them? And one of the things I knew is that certain cards have high values, and this particular card right here is one of them. The card that I gave him was actually the lowest value of the ones that I had because that's just how we decided to do the transaction. We can see this up close right here. The more expensive ones, ridiculous. So what had happened is he is a pawnbroker, so he sees all kinds of electronics, and one of the things that I enjoy is having my friends come over and we hang out and we play network video games. And I've been dying to get a second Xbox to Xbox 360 so I can have four people over and use different TVs to have a lot of fun essentially. But my friend said, hey, you know what? My shop just happened to get an Elite in and a really nice Elite S. And you don't really play with the Magic cards, so let's trade. And I said, sure. And it was a win-win situation for the simple fact that neither one of us left anything on the table. He went to the effort of making sure that the transaction was definitely beneficial on my part, and he was happy with his part of it. So it lacked the failures that people sometimes show in negotiations, which is leaving too much on the table. Oh no, I left something on the table. Overconfidence. This certainly wasn't that kind of situation with my friend. It was also a monolithic trade because the two of us just happened to sit on the same side of the table as far as what we wanted to trade. There was never an issue of, what my, banta was. Both of us had, hey, I can use this. And he said, hey, well, I just could happen to use that. His idea was not to purchase this particular type of card. Again, we will show the card. It was he wanted to use it to play his game. It's just a status symbol. And to me, I was happy to trade something that has an intrinsic value, like an Xbox 360 Elite S, because it's electronics and it has a controller and it is a media center, for something that I had in my possession for 20 years, which I have a number of, which, I understand the value, but I don't play the game enough to where it doesn't have the same kind of value to me. And the great thing about as I further explain the various negotiations on my next subject to Southeast Asia, I'll talk about all these different things right here and how they're used, how this card, right, because he determines a value to him versus what I determine that the value is that it's a card that's been sitting. He's a friend. He's somebody that I know that I will have a future transaction with because it was positive. And this is one of the great things I have enjoyed about this course is being able to delve into the various aspects of negotiation and how people negotiate. When you have cooperation, you don't have to do tit for tat. You can basically say, all right, well, it works for me, it works for him. We know at a future date if everybody's happy. I understand the probable value of this item. It's not just a card. Obviously, I can say, oh, well, card's worth 5 cents. No, it has a collector's value, but the collector value is determined on demand versus how I have the Xbox 360, which again is an intrinsic value because it is actually a electronic device, and I'm very happy with it. We had a great time playing together as a group of friends, and it's going to be something that it it builds good social skills. So I was happy about the transaction on a number of different levels. And one second while I reference my paper here because I want to make sure I cover every aspect of this particular process. Okay, one of the things I want to say, this is a one transaction, one card, one electronic item. Everybody was happy straight across. I consider it time versus technology, right? Because the card itself is a scarce resource, right? So it's taken 20 years to accrue the value that I traded it for, and the Microsoft Xbox 360 is, it's diminishing in value because of the Microsoft Xbox One, which is the next thing to get, but it diminishes in value. But for the playability and my familiarity with the device, I'm perfectly fine. I love it as a media center. It has a lot of different advantages. So again, a perfectly good trade. Okay, both parties felt like we gained. I felt like I gained. He felt like he gained. That's an important thing about not failing at negotiation. Um, both parties were satisfied. This meets many different criteria on what successful negotiation should mean. And in the slides, I'll list the page numbers for further reference to that particular subject. All right. Well, that pretty much covers the first transaction. And the next one will be about Southeast Asia and how to negotiate in that part. Hello, and welcome back. When I have to negotiate in Southeast Asia, so I feel eagle vengeance, because sometimes those merchants can be tough. Well, welcome to the second section of Negotiation and Strategy Final Video Report by Richard Anderson. So on the second section, I'm going to take a subject that's near and dear to my heart. Being a world traveler, I like to go all over the place in the world. And one of my favorite places just happens to be Southeast Asia. I was fortunate enough to live in two separate countries over a 7-year period and got to learn all kinds of really great things about how to negotiate in the region and Asia in general. I mean, not everything is set in stone, obviously, because they're different cultures and different societies, but there are certain things that do apply to business, right? Supply and demand, and, you know, buy cheap, sell high. So what I have in front of me, a couple devices for this particular lesson. These were items that were purchased over a number of different countries: Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Thailand, and they're varying degrees of quality. And I'll show, like the person watching this video or the people watching this video, how to utilize certain, not necessarily tricks of the trade, but methods that will help you deal with merchants better and help them have a better transaction with you. So probably the first and most important thing that I would suggest is never lowball a merchant. Never start out by saying such an obnoxiously low price that the merchant instantly is going to turn on you. Not necessarily turn on you, but they will not take you seriously, and their interactions after that point are going to be negative, and they're going to try to set a higher, point of what they want from you versus being friendly and being fair. If you don't know the price, kind of give it a little bit idea and never go too high, but just never ever go too low. Sometimes let the merchant tell you, but most merchants will say, well, what do you think it's worth? And that's a trick, is that never be the first one to throw out a price. All right, try to get an idea, try to remember, and it goes back to certain items. So the first thing we'll start out with is this. If I were to see this item here, right, I can say, well, you know, it looks like it's manufactured, and of course it is, right? We can see quite simple. So something like this, I would say maybe put a value of $2 to $3 on it, right? So depending on what the local currency is, and one of the cool things about this little lesson here is when you travel in different regions and you have to deal with merchants, a good suggestion is to have a number of different currencies, right? Number one, a good old Ben Franklin works everywhere. I mean, they love this guy right here, but you only pull him out when you know that it's going to be like a jackpot on the transaction. Other times, use local currency, right? This is Thai baht. Now, Thai baht, right, can be used also in neighboring countries, and this is where the dance comes in of negotiation. If somebody says, okay, well, I want 500 baht for something, well, what if I want to pay it in US? And if they say, oh, 20 in US, well, then I know they're full of crap, right? Because part of the idea is to understand what is the dollar worth? What is the baht worth? What is the local currency worth? And someplace like this is, I think this is Lao. Yeah, this one's Lao, right? And this is Cambodia because it has the Angkor on the back. Now, essentially, Laotian and Cambodian currency are worth nothing. I mean, literally, practically worth nothing outside of the country. But for small transactions, it's actually quite useful. For large transactions, forget it. They don't want to pile their own money. They want this guy right here. Especially in Myanmar, this would actually be a bad shape $100 bill because it's the only currency that they know has value. And it's strange, on both sides of Thailand, you have Myanmar and you have Cambodia, and both of them use US dollars extensively. So when you're dealing with a merchant, remember, A, do not lowball the merchant too much because you'll start the interaction off bad. Second, understand what the value of something is. If it's inexpensive, like say a wooden frog, well, chances are you'll be able to find a wooden frog someplace else, right? As it gets increasingly rare, well, it gets a little bit more. Something like this, that's carved jade, right? It's not a white jade, so it's not too expensive, but it's not a dark jade, so it's not too cheap. This right here may look fancy, but I can tell by the lines and assessing the quality that this came out of a mold. That's an important thing too. When you buy something, recognize what something of value is. Look at the quality of the material, look at the quality of the carving. This is a prime example of this right here, right? This is an ancient amber, but it's an amber ball. And fortunately, I dealt with the merchant on a number of times before I purchased something like this, because one of the things you always have to be aware of is that merchants are always going to be like, well, yeah, hey, buy this, it's an antique, I just dug it out of the temple. You know that's a ton of crap, right? And an interesting thing about this particular piece is I got this in Angkor because it's the Buddha from Wat Tom, which is one of the ones you'll see it in Tomb Raider. But if you notice, it's slightly damaged on the top. So I was able to tell the merchant, well, here's the thing. It's that, yeah, it's nice and everything, but it's kind of damaged. And, you really don't want it in your store. So got it for inexpensive. And then I also had her throw in something like this right here. So this is where you pile on, as they say in the book, right? If I were buying something in Thailand, I would maybe go, okay, well, how much is this? All right, well, say they want 1,000 baht for this. And I say, well, how much is this? It goes with it. And they say, well, 500 baht. And I say, well, that's 1,500. Well, what about this here? And they say, well, 500 baht also. Then I would say, well, how about these three things for 1,200, right? And again, that's not lowballing. You're talking about 40 bucks, right? And again, I probably got this a lot cheaper because I keep track of these things. But you're able to beat the initial price point down of this if the merchant agrees. He may say, well, 1,200 is a little bit high, and actually I would probably go with 1,000 right off the bat because I know what the value is. But when you go with an offer, you can also guess what they say. If they say, well, I want 2,000, say the amount works out to 2,200 or 2,000, well, then he's not really moving a lot, right? And then you got to judge by what your transaction is with him. Now, here's a pro tip, and this could be back to the ethics of negotiation, is that in certain Southeast Asian countries, merchants have a superstition about people buying things, the first person to buy something during the day, you'll hear this comment used sometimes, oh, my first sale, right? But one of the things that drives them absolutely mad and absolutely crazy and a good way to get deals, again, a little bit unethical, but I lived in Thailand for 6 years, so I know how to play the game, right? Don't worry, they're playing a game with you, so is you touch things, right? You go, oh man, this frog is amazing, right? Nah, well, I don't know. You put it back, right? And then you touch something again and again. This is, how you feel about using it as a tactic. And depending on the number of things that you touch, if the merchant is unreasonable, just slowly but surely walk out of the store, right? You'll see that merchant will pick those things up and touch them, right? To make sure that they're like your my chalk D, which is bad luck, isn't rubbed off on that because you didn't buy anything. Now, a smart merchant will go, well, I saw you looking at a couple things, so maybe I'll try to sell the cheapest thing right there just to get that good luck. So what will happen is sometimes you'll see in a transaction like that where the merchant will take some of the money, like good luck money, and say, oh, I just sold this, like the merchant that sold me this, right? He was very happy, and so what they do is they have a little cat on the thing, and they rub it for good luck. And again, don't ever put the king, if you're in Thailand, don't ever put his face down on something. It's just the back of it. They respect his image. He's no longer the king. His son is, unfortunately passed away last year, but always respect the currency. So those kinds of interactions are important with merchants. And another thing to remember, there's always another one, right? A merchant will try to tell you, oh, I'm your buddy, I'm your friend. They're not your buddy, they're not your friend, but they are somebody that you can have a deal with. Sometimes if you go to some place that looks really fancy, well, chances are you're going to pay the price. Real estate is important. Sometimes it's better just to walk in the back of a market and see what you can find versus just picking up whatever's out front. And another thing to look for is how the merchant smiles, how they react. Do they show like signs of a shifty nature? Are they comfortable with you? Are they curt with you? If a merchant is short with you, then chances are they're not a very good merchant, right? There's the ones I like to deal with are people that understand. If I pick up two or three things and I say, well, what if I put these together? And they kind of go, well, yeah, you can kind of do that, because what happens is they recognize that they're reducing their stock to get new things as well as selling you something that you like. And it's an absolutely important thing. Next thing, never show anger. If a merchant pisses you off, walk away. Don't say anything. Walk away. It's always the best option in a negotiation strategy in Southeast Asia, because unfortunately, if you get lippy and you get angry, you may get in a situation that you will not be able to handle because it's not the United States. And unfortunately, I have seen these kinds of things happen, is that if you don't like the merchant, then walk away. Don't buy anything from them. Never buy something from somebody you don't like. It doesn't matter how much you want something, you will always find something better or something cooler. Merchants that are nice, well, they happen to be good merchants. They will work with you. And a jerk is somebody that's trying to rip you off. They're trying to use the psychology of like, hey, look at me. I'm trying to help you out. No, you're not. You're not my buddy. You're not my friend. You're somebody I'm trying to buy something for or from at a reasonable price. Where you win, I win. It's another element that's important. These are business people. They have families to feed. They have themselves to feed. They have stores that they have to pay for. They have to pay for stock. Places like Bangkok, well, they have to pay the police, and that's not a lie. That's a soft power kind of thing. If you want to sell, things on a place called Pratunam, well, guess what? You got to pay the police $20 a day. Probably, depending on the stall, a little bit more than that, but it's just a fact of life. And so when you deal with these merchants, understand they're trying to make a living, understand that they are people too, they have families, and just don't be bullied by them. Try to make a good transaction that you feel you're comfortable with and that they're comfortable with. You don't have to buy something right off the bat. A lot of merchants in Southeast Asia will try this, like, well, if you don't buy it now, guess what? You don't buy it now. That's just the way it is. So I hope this second section was useful and practical. Thank you very much, and I will have one last section wrapping this up. So, in closing, you must remember some simple things. The first transaction was a win-win situation where both me and the person I was dealing with were completely happy with the transaction. In the second transaction, the outcome can sometimes vary because you're dealing with different people that necessarily don't have a personal connection to you. It's important to remember that when you deal with other people in foreign countries is to never look down on them. Never have a complex of where you judge them by them having less. It's some of the ideas that we explain in the book, or that are explained in the book about how we interact with people. It is also important to always remain calm when you negotiate. Understand that if you add emotion to it, then you bring in another element that you may not be able to control. Interactions don't always work out for the best, but you always should try to achieve something that you're comfortable with. Never make a negotiation that you are uncomfortable with or that you compromise yourself. If you ethically disagree with it, then sometimes that's the choice that you have to make, to just walk away. Um, Unfortunately, that's never a 100% concept with people, and people make unethical decisions when they have to. As I said, unfortunately, traveling a lot, you see unethical behavior quite a bit from every type of people. So hopefully everybody enjoys this video presentation. I will provide a couple slides that dealt with some of the reasoning behind what I had said and some of the interactions, and hope you enjoy the video. Thank you very much, and have a nice day.